Good evening, everybody. My name is Jason Scorza. I'm Vice Provost for Academic and International Affairs here at Fairleigh Dickinson University, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to a very special global education event. We will be discussing this evening the stories of women from around the world. We will be talking about some really primal questions, not only for global society, but also for American society. I'd like to just tell you a little bit about the two sponsors for tonight's event. The first sponsor is the United Nations Academic Impact Program, which was a special initiative of Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, which brings together more than 1,000 universities around the world to do programs and events just like this one. It was Ban Ki-moon's vision that universities should be part of the solution to global challenges. And so he reached out initially to Michael Adams, the former president of Fairleigh Dickinson University, and asked his advice about how to do that, how to connect with universities in every corner of the world, large universities, small ones, private ones, public ones, religious and secular. And Michael Adams said, well, you know, why don't we have a list of principles that these universities can sign up for? And Ban Ki-moon thought that was a great idea, and President Adams came back to the university and said, Scorza, I need 10 principles for global higher education. It's like, okay. So the program that is our sponsor actually was born here at FDU, and we're very proud of it. The second sponsor of our program is the Office of Global Learning, an office that has brought you such exciting programs as UN Pathways, and I hope many of you have attended some of those events with visiting diplomats, and if you haven't, I hope you will in the future. The Office of Global Learning also organizes trips to the United Nations, including one tomorrow morning, and runs all sorts of other interesting and exciting programs, including co-sponsoring International Week on both campuses. And I'd like to give special recognition to Sarah Horn, the Assistant Director of Global Learning, for all of her help putting this evening's program together. But you're not here to listen to me rattle on. You're here to listen to stories. So I'd like to call upon Professor Eli Andor to come and say a few words.
Jason, thank you. And I got to get in 2 cents for another organization, and that's Sands of Time. Because indeed this is as much a Sands of Time event in its conceptualization and its process as any. And we are really very happy to have been working on this event with the Office of Global Learning. So thank you for everything you've done, Jason and Sarah, and all of our incredibly concerned panelists, whom you will meet shortly. Those of you who know me know that I normally have a lot to say about anything you ask. Well, tonight I'm not going to say it, because I think there are more important things and more passionate things that can be brought to you than what I can say. Tonight you're here to listen to a representative collection of very fine young minds, most of whom were FDU or are FDU students, and are part of this new entity called Global Young Voices. It's sprouted here, but has reached beyond here, as many things we do at FDU. And as we get through the evening, I think you will either empathetically as a millennial or sympathetically as one of the older generations here feel great confidence in the future of the world when you know who's thinking about it. Global Young Voices speak on many issues, politics and conflict, business and technology, careers and lifestyles, culture, arts, sports and leisure, and more. And I encourage you, if you have not already done that, to check out their website, which is logically called globalyoungvoices.com, and take some time, some precious time, to read some of the essays that are written by everyone on this panel and about 45 or more others around the world. Your time will not only be well spent, it will be well spent in your own development. They're here tonight to talk about gender equality. And as I got to know them, and some of these young men and women I've known for an awfully long time, and some I've just met today, but thinking about the issue of global gender equality, and you will hear from each of them stories from their homelands. Let me point out an interesting observation that I just made this afternoon, and that is that of the 6 people involved, the 5 panelists and Rohan, whom I will introduce shortly, of those 6, 3 of them are from countries that have or have had a woman elected head of state from all over the world. Now let me ask you Americans here, have we figured out how to do that yet? I thought it was an interesting observation, and we've had a couple of interesting conversations about that as well, but nonetheless, as titular or ceremonial as some of them may be, some of the heads of state, nonetheless, 3 out of our 6 panelists are coming from countries that have broken that glass ceiling. What I find so compelling about tonight's discussion, and by the way, when you go on globalyoungvoices.com, you will see discussions on so many subjects, but tonight's is that it is a subject that has so far eluded us. And when I say us, I'm talking about the 7.3 billion people on the face of the earth. And it doesn't affect only 1/2 of the population who happen to be female. Because when one of us is treated unequally, we are all treated unequally. So it becomes mandatory, whether you are the victim or the beneficiary of unequal treatment, it becomes mandatory to work together to fix it. And that is why we are here tonight. So with that, to begin tonight's proceedings, I have the great pleasure of introducing a friend who will be our keynote speaker. Professor Danielle Walker has taught 7 different gender-related courses at 2 universities here in New Jersey. She has an undergraduate and a graduate degree in women's studies, served as an NGO representative to the 57th United Nations Conference on Women, developed a course that never existed before called Women in Social Media, and is now very actively conducting workshops of her own design in girls' empowerment. And they are so good that they have now expanded to include empowerment for boys. A very impassioned, global citizen. Danielle is here to help us lead off this evening. Would you please help me in welcoming Professor Danielle Walker?
Good evening, Fairleigh Dickinson. Good evening, and hello to our special virtual viewers tonight. I understand there are many of you tuning in. I have worked, studied, and interned at 5 different universities and colleges, and FDU is by far the most globally diverse. It's pretty hard not to walk down the hallway and walk past someone who's from another country. So that's very special, and it's really no surprise that FDU does have such a special relationship with the United Nations. In fact, I think we could say that FDU's campus is like a United Nations in its own right. Some individuals will go their entire lives without ever really experiencing rich difference, but our millennials here are spending their early lives knee-deep in it. In other words, we have major bragging rights. So this brings us to the reason that we are here tonight. Global Young Voices is an international organization inspired and led by our millennials to bring awareness about the human experience. I will speak to you very briefly about the female experience that some women and girls go through in the world. We live in a world where mothers still die in childbirth. Last year, the World Health Organization estimated that approximately 830 mothers die from pregnancy or childbirth-related causes. Save the Children estimated in their 2015 State of the Mother's World Report that 1 in every 15 women in Chad and 1 in every 49 women in Afghanistan will die from these maternal-related risks. We live in a world where human trafficking is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And no country, no city, no town is immune to its reach. Recent reports from the International Labor Organization target sex trafficking profit at $99 billion, and it's growing. That was actually a statistic from 2014. This heinous act that I personally call hell on earth victimizes little girls as young as 3 years old, and there have even been reports that infants have been raped by clients as well. It's not uncommon for mothers to even sell their own children out of impoverished desperation, or for women to be running brothels. That truly adds, I think, another layer to our conversation on gender equality, because I think sometimes it's easy to pigeonhole, no offense, but men as the problem or the oppressors. But how interesting and how important to include the fact that indeed some women perpetuate patriarchy and sexism and inequality. However contrary that may seem. We live in a world with female genital mutilation, where female village members restrain a young girl while she has her genitals unskillfully cut in the name of a cultural tradition. The United Nations surveyed girls who were married before the age of 18 during the years of 2000 to 2010, in Mali specifically. Would you like to know the percentage of females who experienced FGM in their childhood before their 18th birthday? That would be a staggering 85% of girls in Mali. In our world, women are still underrepresented in the workforce in certain countries. As of 2014, only 27% of women were employed in India. There are plenty of countries that still do not have laws against domestic violence, marital rape, sexual harassment. There are forms of femicide that include honor killings in the Middle East and infanticide in China. So women and girls are learning through their legal system, through their political system, their education system, from the media and their families, what their worth is. And depending on where you're born in the world, that can hold little to no value. Gender equality is very deeply embedded in the cultures that we have around the world. It is institutionalized and it is systematic. But just as it has been done, we can undo it. It's just going to take a lot of discussion, a lot of action, a lot of time, and a lot of people from all over the globe. So now, let's do what FDU does best. Here begins our panel on global gender equality, directed by our very own, vibrantly diverse young men and women. Thank you.
Danielle says young men and women, and I step up to the microphone. I'm here for only a second. With as much pleasure as I introduced Danielle, I now want to introduce to you someone who will take over from here and guide you through what the program will be and then commence upon it. He is a good friend, one whom I enjoy being with and whom I admire. He is a co-founder of Global Young Voices, and he is a board member for growth and technology for the organization. May I ask you to welcome Rohan Maheshwari.
Good evening, everyone. Before we begin, I would like to take a minute to kind of fathom a big loss that we faced at FDU recently. A student of ours, her name was Wei Chi Wang, suffered a fatal accident last week while crossing across the library. And in the spirit of FDU and in the fact that she's our colleague, I would just like to take a few minutes to remember her, to pray for her, or whatever the process is, and we would continue from there. So please join me for a minute to take a few moments of silence for her. Thank you. So to get on to our program for tonight, I want to start off with a little experience that I faced a couple of weeks ago. Traditionally, sportsmen put their paternal last names on the backs of their jerseys when they go to their fields. But this past month, in a final cricket match played between India and New Zealand, something particularly unusual transpired. The Indian cricket team walked onto the field with their mothers' names on their backs, marking the very first occasion of such a thing ever happening. Their goal was to acknowledge that their mothers' names were as important as their fathers and tried to echo the sentiment of the younger generation of Indians that tried to go towards gender equality. This and various other movements around the world show that millennials going into the 21st century are very vocal in emphasizing the importance of giving equal standing to all individuals, irrespective of their caste, color, race, or sexual orientation. Archaic as it may seem, we still face many of these inequalities even today. Tonight, we hope to curate a conversation that encapsulates the different issues women face in varied parts of the world. Through anecdotal evidences, movements, discussions, and personal struggles our panelists have faced. I hope they inspire you to believe in a world that will be void of prejudice and malice towards characteristics that are unchosen, and that we as millennials together build a world that celebrates and utilizes differences rather than fears them. When approached by Professor Amdur and Professor Scorza on hosting an event with Global Young Voices, I couldn't think of a better issue to talk about from a global perspective. given that it's the century of the woman, and I mean, we have like 80-something years to go, but I thought we would start early, and that it's part of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, I thought that this was a great issue to talk about. For issues like these and many others that we face in the world today, we founded Global Young Voices 2 years ago. GYV is a team of 45 people. In just 2 years, we've grown to 45 people with 33 countries represented that produce articles every week trending on topics ranging from technology and politics to sports and culture. Our readership extends to 193 countries, and our content is delivered through social media. Actually, as we speak, we have a hacky setup to have Facebook Live set up today, so we are connecting to 10,000 of our subscribers. Our long-term goal is to expand to contributors from 100 different countries so that whenever something monumental takes place everywhere, we have a voice, a global voice, an educated voice, a youth voice that can give you things that, for example, mainstream media cannot. And believe it or not, this entire operation is run completely online. We use a software to chat, and that's the only communication we have. And it's a no-cost shop. And that's where we're here today to, celebrate our existence, to celebrate gender equality, and to talk about some of the issues that we face today. Before we begin the program, I would like to remind you to keep your cell phones on silent and think of this, despite the seemingly formal setup, as a discussion or a forum rather than a presentation. At the end of the event we begin, every one of our speakers will come in and give their story or their topic, and then we'll begin to talk about the topic amongst the panelists. And the floor is always open to any audience member. You just need to raise your hands. We'll try to find you so you can ask questions. You can find out more about where they're coming from and stuff like that. So we're really, really privileged to have you here tonight, and I really hope that you enjoy this. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Julien Philippe, I am 24 years old and I am French. As the General Manager of Global Young Voices, I would like to introduce Camilla, who will be explaining the main challenges that Italian women face in their professional lives.
Hello everyone, my name is Camilla and I'm from Italy. It is a pleasure to be here tonight, and I would like to thank Julien for his lovely introduction and for all the hard work that he really puts into this organization, Global Young Voices. So today I'm here to talk about the role of young women in the labor market, moving along the three most relevant milestones in a woman's working life: education and first employment, the creation of a family, and the reach of a top executive position. For what concerns education, the Italian populations present some peculiarities. First of all, there are more men finishing high school than women, and amongst other reasons, this can be attributed to the fact that in low-income families, women are the first one to drop out of school. In fact, 22% of girls drop out of school for these reasons, against as low as 12% for men. But when it comes to college, the reverse happens. There is a higher percentage of women who attain a university degree. In fact, in the population aged around 34, 15% of women are graduated against 10% of men. So there is a substantial difference. Nonetheless, in Italy, 3 years after graduation, 78% of men and 70% of women have found a job. So there is a discrimination in the labor market, even though women graduate more. Further, males find better working conditions in terms of long-term contracts and full-time contracts. And for what concerns remuneration, discrimination starts as early as a simple internship, where women are paid less than half than men. If we look at a broader time span, we can see that the discrimination is a bit lower, but still exists. In fact, young men have 18% higher pays than women. When it comes to creating a family, 22% of working women lose their jobs or resign. Further, many women leave the workplace before the age of 50 for family reasons. My mom, for instance, continued to work despite the 2 pregnancies, but dropped out of the workforce in the mid-40s to take care of my sister and I while my dad was pursuing his career. And I'm sure that a lot of you have probably had the same experience. Another pressing issue is that within families with children, women take up 72% of the work hours needed to take care of the family. This percentage used to be as high as 88% in 1998. in 1988. So there is a good positive trend that has to be noted. But I do hope that the percentage of men who do not know how to work a washing machine or an iron moves away from that 98.6% steady. Lastly, for what concerns women in top executive roles, the past years have been characterized by positive trends, which can be largely sustained by the pink quota law that was introduced in Europe in 2011. This law is one that imposes a specific female representation in the boards of public companies. This representation is 30%. And in fact, 30% of the boards of Italian companies are now made up by women, and this is a huge success for this law and for the Italian and thus European population. The problem of unequal representation, though, has shifted to lower levels. In fact, women in top executive roles are only 10.25% in small firms and as low as 3.7% in large ones. So we can see that there is a bit of discrimination there. So what is the main message after all this data that I showed you? Well, first of all, there is the urge of pushing for a cultural change within the Italian families to encourage young girls to pursue education beyond middle school and make sure that we ensue laws that prevent girls from dropping out of school for financial reasons. Secondly, there needs to be more flexibility in the workplace to allow women to remain in the labor market, even after giving birth, whether it be through flexible hours or childcare opportunities. And I know we've heard this a lot, but who has really done it? How many companies can we say that really provide this kind of flexibility for mothers? To this end, it is also crucial for men to help take care of the family, and this too needs a cultural change. This aspect is particularly relevant in Italy, where young men are fully taken care of by their mothers. I don't know if you've heard the saying mama's boy, but that's exactly what I'm referring to. And for this reason, they grow up expecting to be fully taken care of by their wives. So this is something that us women need to make sure we change while we grow up our sons. And that's it for me.
Camilla, grazie. Camilla, let me ask you about something going on in Italy right now. Matteo Renzi, your prime minister, has said that he wants to cut the size of the Italian government by 2/3. You probably have more seats in your parliament than any other country. What do you see as the prospects? Now, I can ask others to chime in on this as well. If it is difficult for women to advance into positions like this, and you're about to see a 2/3 cut in your government, how do you see yourself holding ground?
Thanks for the question. So first of all, it must be said that with the Renzi government, the female representation within the public government has increased. In fact, with the reform that he wants to introduce with the referendum that I'm going back to vote for this December 4th, it is the first time that in our constitution, if it passes, there will be a point that establishes a specific female representation and equality in the government. So this is a huge milestone for women as well. For what concerns the difficulties for women to, let's say, emerge in the government, it's not that easy, and I don't see that many women. And also, they're often subject of discrimination. For example, we had our secretary of the Senate, of the Chambers of Parliament, sorry, and she has been subject to very, very rough attacks on Facebook and on social media, whereas no other man has. So there is this problem where our ministers and prominent figures of government who are female, the very few, are being abused verbally through social media. So
We've just come off 2 years' worth of a presidential campaign where we've gotten used to attacks on social media. Several of you on this panel are from countries in which there is now a law that mandates that a certain percentage of your representatives are women. Would any of you care to address that for a moment?
I was actually going to talk about it in my part, but I might as well just say it now.
Give us a heads up.
Yeah. Well, according to the reforms made over the past couple of years in Nepal, without changing constitution every year, and and the finalized version that came out in 2015, we do have a specific quota, like 1/3 of the House of Representatives has to be women, but in the past years, it has never been fulfilled, like never. I guess it's mostly like 1/3 would be what, like about 33%, but it's not. It's to the most would be like 10% or 15% that has been fulfilled, and much of which is also the political instability that we faced over the years, and like Kami mentioned, like just like how it's difficult for women to advance and emerge in political scenario. It's much harder in developing and underdeveloped countries, even though the law exists to promote them to get to that stage.
Back to Camilla for a second. The Italian economy has not grown in 20 years. It has grown only incrementally with the population. In an economy that owns a job market that is in the shape that Italy's is in right now, which is not good, what can you do from your generational leverage? You are the largest generation on earth right now in terms of numbers. What can you do to open the opportunities?
Yeah, this is an interesting question, and the first thing that comes to mind is speak up. So, for example, when you go to a job interview and you're proposed a job, and you are proposed a certain salary, ask, is this salary the same one that you're proposing to a man? So it's really about this, because you have no other way of overcoming this. So we really need to speak up and make sure that us as future leaders or managers or whatever will be are more familiar and sensible to these type of things, because most people don't even know that women are paid less than men. Very few people do. And people think it can't be true. Why would a company in front of two people offer two different salaries? It seems absurd, but it's not. It's reality. So the first thing is raise awareness. Make sure you know what is happening. And the second thing is speak up if you see that something is not right.
Do you have a power to do that with social media that you use, unlike your previous or your predecessor generations?
Yes, we do, of course. I think that social media has revolutionized our lives pretty much, because we are now open to loads of information that has also its downsides, but I think that it's a good way of spreading awareness about these facts, and it's immediate, and it's something that it's with us. We always have our phones in our hands. We're always open to a world of information that we can reach, and that wasn't possible to be reached from generations before us, our parents, or even people that are just 10 years older, because they weren't born with technology like us.
We were born before it, and we are still learning it. You were born into it and don't know a world without it. That is as good enough of a segue as possible for our next presenter, Vanessa Young. Vanessa will talk to us about an issue that is alive and well, unfortunately, because of the internet. So if you please, Vanessa.
Hello everyone, my name is Paul Bogdan. I'm 24 years old, Global Young Voices contributor from Russia. Today, my friend Vanessa will be talking to you about sexual grooming of young ladies in Malaysia.
Sexual grooming. So yes, good evening everybody, and thank you for coming, and thank you to our viewers on our live feed for tuning in. Quick question, how many of you know roughly or are very familiar with the term sexual grooming? Show of hands, yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, that's a good number, and that's what I will be talking about today. And how I think really just talking about it and engaging in that discussion, I think, as Professor Danielle had mentioned earlier, this is us taking action. It's more than just through our social media, like and share and comment. We're going beyond that. This is what we're doing tonight, and this is how we will be discussing about it. So, sexual grooming, for those who are not familiar with the term, there we go, is the act of, in a sense, coaching and teaching young women. And unfortunately, it happens to mostly young women, young girls, as young as 14 years old, could be even younger, to teach them how to, sexually please men. And a lot of these girls, they're in that stage, that puberty stage where they're not sure, they're starting to sort of explore their bodies, their anatomy, and talk from friends in school. And now, the younger generation, they can access the internet so easily. So recently, and I'm sure this issue has been around for a long, long time, but the problem is that it's not considered a criminal offense. The reason being is because they're only taught. There's no physical or actual sexual abuse, and I think that's something that we don't talk about enough. We always talk about what happens towards the end, Some of these girls, as I mentioned, they don't really know what's happening, and they sort of engage with these conversations. Now, how does this start? It starts with online. Again, we're in that era where technology, social media is keeping us so connected, and some of these young girls, they meet older men online. Could be mutual friends, or they're playing around with a phone app that gives them access to talk to people anonymously. And as they befriend these men, they start to gain their trust, and they start talking about things. Hey, what do you think about sex or sexual pleasure? What do you know? And they start teaching, or supposedly teaching, these young girls about sex and sexually pleasing men. So I put the second point as is not to be confused with child pornography. Now, they don't engage with putting things up to a pornographic website, but they do share these nude pictures, whether or not they share clips with one another. It's very one-on-one. It's more like in their own private conversation. So one such incident that happened in Malaysia that really shocked the nation was this volunteer from Britain who had come to, again, as I say, volunteer in an orphanage in Malaysia. He had been found to have sexually abused almost 200 children, and of which he was sexually grooming them. So again, you see, trusted adults, it's so, you never know, it could be somebody as a volunteer, you trust them, somebody you met, as I mentioned, through online, and they become your friend, and that's somebody you trust. And so they are not sexual education classes. So yeah, the statistic over here in 2014 provided by the Malaysian Police Headquarters in 2014 to 2016, 80% of these girls end up being raped. And see, that's where a lot more conversation and light and attention is being put on the rape, but we don't talk about what happens before. So that's what I intend to share tonight. And I found out about this act through a project by Rage over here, and they're a group of young journalists in a local newspaper. And so I suppose they heard about this and decided to do their own investigation. And so what they had was their own female journalists pose as younger, they could be 20 years old, but they were telling men online that I'm actually 15, and they kind of looked young as well. And so they would meet up with these men and start asking questions, what is this all about, and all these things. And you have men who tell the journalists, of course not knowing, they're undercover, that these young girls, some of them supposedly want to learn, And I think the big question is, why don't they learn from maybe at home or from trusted and reliable sources? So I hope we can engage with that conversation tonight. And I will.
Vanessa, you and I were talking about this before.
Yes, we were.
And we were talking about, and I'd like you to continue this, the role of education
Yes.
in defeating this problem. Specifically, something we talked about, not only educating young girls, but educating their parents. If you please.
Yeah, I think the issue is that, as I mentioned, they meet these men online and through chats, phone apps. And I think parents are just not aware of how some of these phone applications work, how they meet people online, and how they engage these conversations, who they meet online, for that matter. And so educating the parents in that sense that it is possible for their children to meet these strangers, complete strangers, anonymous and or known, mutual friends, as I mentioned. So, and education, because as I mentioned to you earlier, Ellie, in our conversation, that Malaysia tends to be quite a conservative country, and we do have religions that are quite conservative. So the topic of sex education doesn't really come out at the dinner table. Son, daughter, I shall talk to you today about these things. And so I cannot say that it's understandable why children, especially these young women, come up online and start asking. They want to know, they're curious. And so, but again, they're not getting it from the right people, and so they're sort of trapped in this conversation, this relationship, if you will, friendship, where they get told, oh yes, you can please a man if you did this, and then they'll ask for things as pictures or show examples. It gets quite graphic. That's the issue. So, and it's only been recently brought to light, and tonight I chose this topic because as a Malaysian and as a young woman myself, only to hear about it in I don't know, this probably has been going on for many, many years, and I didn't even know about it until this group, Rage, started talking about it. So, and again, as I mentioned, rather than just liking and sharing the links from Rage on my Facebook wall and my timeline, I choose to have this conversation on the panel to really, for us young people to start talking about these kind of issues.
Tell us a little bit about the makeup of Malaysia. You and I were talking about the big difference between the urban centers and the more remote areas.
Right, yes. So I was mentioning earlier that I personally received sexual education at age possibly 12, 11 from my school, from my parents, and I think I truly appreciate that my parents didn't make this a taboo topic. But then I'm also reminded that I come from the capital city, where we're very urbanized, westernized, globalized, so we're more open-minded and we're more accessible to this kind of information. Whereas, suppose, outer states, slightly more rural areas where it's not so urban, and as I mentioned, some of them are conservative. These, the demographics of these areas, they're more conservative, more religious, and so this topic is taboo. It's not enough. Yes.
Do you think, or do you believe that if there was more widespread sexual education from a younger age, that it would make the issue so that there's not a statistic that 80% of rape cases were reported involving sexual predators?
Yes. I think timing is important, especially as I mentioned, some of these girls are 14 years old, some could be even younger. And, timing and really teaching them from a very young age. But then there's also the issue that now even younger children have access to the internet. So when is the right age to start? Yes.
This is a very staggering statistic. I mean, do you think that social media companies and dating apps can do more in their efforts to report people, do pattern recognition to track disparities in age, or to kind of try to cut it from their end, or do something that the social media companies themselves can do to prevent it? Because I think right now it's confused with cyberbullying.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Molestation, wrongful assault, but I think there has to be specific. I mean, 8 and 10 people.
Yeah.
Solve that. Solve all of that.
It is. And, that is a very interesting question, and I would love to see that become reality, although I cannot say for sure it would be impactful, but I definitely think it will help to an extent. Yes, there was a question at the back.
Is this a problem is this problem exclusive, is this statistic exclusive to Malaysia, or is this something that is seen across the world, but is this statistic specific to Malaysia?
Yes.
My follow-up to that is,
Okay.
do you know what the statistic is across the world?
Across the world, I am not entirely clear as to what the current statistic that is. I know it changes from time to time.
May I insert a thought on this, please?
Sure.
And I'll make this very brief. The three largest populations in the world, in reverse order, number 3 is India, number 2 is China, and number 1 is Facebook. This problem is magnified in Malaysia for sure, but bet your tuition dollars that it exists everywhere.
I do, yes. And I'm not only bringing up this topic to just share with you the issues that we face in Malaysia, but I'm certain it does happen all over the world. It's just that we don't talk about it enough. And I hope that through this we become a bit more aware that sexual grooming does exist, and that maybe we can look more into it and learn more about it. Because actually what I forgot to mention earlier, Rage has started this project. It's called Predator in my phone, and that is how I got to know more and more about this. So if you're interested to learn more about just sexual grooming in general, you can look this up online. Yes.
How does it make this a criminal offense? I know it's not child pornography, but trying to make it kind of not like that, but I guess not the same sort of area or same sort of.
Yeah, because I mentioned earlier, because they haven't physically done anything to these young women, that it's not considered a criminal offense. But through Rage, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to build up this awareness, and they're trying to get the people of Malaysia to speak up and say, we need to make this a criminal offense. That if you're caught attempting or actually sexually grooming a young person, a minor, female, male, regardless, it should be a criminal offense. Yes.
Would you agree that the media and the things that we all view or are encouraged to wear or buy, the market, would you agree that they have a role in sexual grooming as well?
That is a very interesting and tough question. Sexually grooming in what are you?
So, for example, I have 2 little sisters.
Okay.
And putting social media aside,
Okay.
based on the magazines they look and the clothes they want to wear,
Mm-hmm.
pop stars they look up to, I would say that they're being sexually groomed.
As in, like, what?
Taught how to dress,
I see. Oh, yeah, actually. I didn't even think about that point, and thank you for that, because, see, these things we just become so accustomed to seeing every day on a day-to-day basis. You could be walking down in Times Square, 34th Street and you see a Victoria's Secret ad flash on the TV, and we just think, oh, it's advertising, but we never really think the impact of it. Thank you. Does anybody want to add to that? I thought that was very interesting.
I think something very interesting. I'm from the FDU Vancouver campus, but I'm right now living in Toronto. And a recent event that raised a lot of discussion was that the new sex ed curriculum for the province of Ontario was actually authored by a guy who is now being processed and actually sent to jail for producing child pornography and having sexually abused other kids. So, or like coaching someone on how to sexually groom a child. So, to your point in the back when you ask about the sexual education curriculums, like that doesn't substitute, I think, the role of parents to take care of how they receive this information. And I know it's some kids, especially in rural areas, won't have, will come from broken families and won't have that type of attention. But we still need to, bring out that point that that curriculum, that class doesn't substitute the environment of a family. Yes. Well, I think it's a combination of both sides. And to your point also, like speaking up about how the media, the advertising has, it's free societies. You can certainly put the advertisements out there. I don't say like ban all the Victoria's Secret advertises there, but be critical or be engaged in in interesting conversation with kids about it. So I will say it's an effort from everywhere, but Rohan.
I think that teaching people, as we went about to the education point that we brought about, telling them how these ads and the media and the movies affect them subconsciously,
right,
and telling them to be aware of how it can affect them without them noticing, without them knowing that they're being maybe groomed or pushed in a certain direction to look a certain way to please somebody. They should be aware through education that these things are there in the world and they are going to affect you, but you should be aware of how they affect you.
Right.
Should be education.
So this is a specific subject that I'm sure none of us really knew about until you brought it to our attention, Vanessa. I suggest that we all take it upon ourselves to look into this, to do the same kind of research we can do that we could never do years ago because we have that keyboard at our fingertips, the same keyboard that brings us the same kind of problems that you're talking about. So it's your responsibility, obviously, as you inherit the world and do something about it, is to take those technologies that can be used one way or another and use it the right way. So it's a great thing for us that you brought us to our attention this subject, and thank you. Let's move on. Are we going to Oman now, or are we?
Issues involving women's rights in Oman tend to be quite different from the ones in the West. Although we have organizations and feminist groups, they tend to be very small and lacking of significant input. Therefore, the improvement of Omani women's status has not resulted from the pressure of these organizations and groups, as much as from the male and the political section to modernize and industrialize the society. During my time studying abroad, I faced so many questions related to women's rights in Oman. For example, can women vote? Do women in your country drive? And do you have arranged marriage? And some question as simple as, do women have rights in your country? Being asked all these questions made me realize the status of women's rights in my country, especially young women. And I realized that we face inequality almost every day of our life. For example, curfew hours. Usually in the household, males have more freedom to go out at whatever time they want and with whoever they want. But when it comes to daughters, some families will not allow their daughters to stay out late without the presence of a family member, and some will not even allow their daughters to go out at night. When it comes to traveling, the same thing goes with males. They can travel with their friends and can do whatever they want, but when it comes to their daughters, they're not allowed to travel without the presence of their family members, and some wouldn't even dare to ask the permission to travel. Another form of inequality in Oman is the passing rate. When it comes to male, they can receive a full funded scholarship by the government if they score even as low as 60% out of 100. But when it comes to female, they won't receive a scholarship by the government if they score less than 70 or 75%. And that's just another example of inequality between young women in Oman. And their excuses is that women are smarter than men. When it comes to marriage in Oman, some families will still follow the arranged marriage system, which means they will still choose who their daughter should marry. And while it is, without taking their opinion in consideration actually, while it is the opposite for male, they can choose whoever they want to get married to and when they want to get married. When it comes to the, if you are non-Omani and want to marry an Omani woman, you both will have to seek for a permit, a marriage permit from the Ministry of Interior. And usually they make the process harder for females to get the approval than males, especially the younger the woman, the harder it is to get the permit or the approval to get married, sometimes up to 3 years. And to conclude, women's inequality issues in Oman will not get settled anytime soon, but us as young Omani women are starting to speak up, and hopefully one day our voices will be heard and changes will be made. Thank you.
I don't know if we all heard one particular point, which I would like to reiterate because the sound quality kind of dipped at that moment. Zoina said that for young men graduating high school to get a scholarship to college in Oman, they need to score about 50 or 55% on their exams in order to attain that scholarship. Women, to get the same scholarship, have to score 70 to 75%. This is probably as blatant an example of discrimination that we have heard tonight. Putting you on the spot, folks, because you didn't expect me to ask you this, your reactions, please, any of you.
Hey everyone, my name is Kushan and I'm from Sri Lanka. Speaking about the inequality in education, I think I can say with confidence that my country Sri Lanka has done a lot in a positive direction. We have a very high literacy rate, and it's important across many different studies. It's been found the higher the amount of women are engaged in economic activity, it's positively correlated with the economy growing and for higher returns. So fundamentally stopping or curbing the ability for women to participate in in the economy through something as fundamental as education is definitely a step backwards. And you cannot, move as a society as long as education stops. And I think that's a common theme across different countries, that education is like one of the most important factors when it comes to achieving some sort of equality for women.
Comments from the audience on this?
To go off that, in India, high school education is completely free for women. So from 10th grade onwards until whenever you graduate, there's no fees.
I don't know if you heard that, but in India, high school education and below is completely free for women. We heard earlier that that only about 27% of Indian women are in the workforce, correct? Is this aimed at changing that?
Yes, so the current Prime Minister of India, actually made a comment which is very similar to what Kushan said. He said that if we have only 50% of the population given the choice to work, and we just don't regard or don't give the opportunities to the rest, we lose out on a lot of manpower, a lot of scientists, a lot of astrophysicists, a lot of artists, a lot of people who contribute and make a society great are just discounted because you just don't consider them whatsoever. So giving them a chance and giving them equality really is good for a nation in the long run, because you have more hands on deck to solve problems, to innovate, to solve even world problems, for example. So I think that it's, even though this is only public-based schools, and even though it's been there for a long time, the Prime Minister has made it very easy for women to find more jobs, try to create programs to get them bank accounts, to give them more rights, to have them more identifiable. So I think education, as we have seen as a theme, is very important.
Thanks, Rohan. We've obviously heard, woven through every discussion so far, the fundamental theme of education.
Ellie, if I could.
Kushan, please.
Yes, there was a mention about a curfew, and I just wanted to add something from my perspective. In some countries, the curfew on women can be religious, but in other places, it could be something that comes out of love. Like, just a personal example, my own sister, my parents drop her off at school every day, and my father waits for her to in the afternoon to pick her up. And now, like, when I go back home, I would say, like, you need to give her independence. And this is an argument that I've always lost, and I don't know the answer to. They talk about, how dangerous it is out there for women. And I think this is another common theme that goes within specifically South Asian countries, where, the women are sheltered towards a larger degree from their families. And this is, it's not to curb their chances. It's something that comes out of love. And I just felt like I should include that when she was talking about the curfew.
Thank you. And I was going to say that's where I feel as though educating young women and empowering them with protecting them will enable them to kind of, because there is a fine line between sheltering them and protecting them. So that's where I think the education and empowering plays in. And
that is about as good an introduction to our next speaker as possible. Oh, do we have another comment, please?
Oh, no, I thought it was very interesting how Kushan was saying he would go home and sort of tell his parents to give his sister a bit more independence. That's an argument on my end as the daughter I tend to lose on, because I won't say my parents would, are completely free and easy with my older brother, but I definitely do feel this extra sense of concern. The common thing they always say, daughter, it can't be helped. And I'm like, it can be helped. And I think it can be helped. But the question is that something that's been passed down, this thought? Or is it because we're younger and we're thinking, I can be a lot more independent? And I think if both male and female were more mindful about curfews or education or these. Yes, sorry, Rohan.
I've actually faced a very similar situation, but and I have a younger sister as well, and she goes out in Mumbai. Mumbai is known to be not very safe at night, so I find myself in a conundrum where I say, okay, go out, but be careful, be in a group of people, don't be alone. But at the same time, if she's out till 2, which I usually do and my parents wouldn't say anything to me, they say the same thing to her. And I think it psychologically affects a child to know that she has to be protected, that she has to go out and she's not safe, whereas her brother, for example, is safe. So can we come up with any way of facing this conundrum, particularly in Southeast Asia? Because if my sister goes out for a night out, she should be allowed to go, but I would be worried knowing that there's people who might harm her in some way or the other, and that also comes from a valid place.
And now I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Another friend of mine whom I've known for years. Urusha Lama is here to talk to us about the status of women in patriarchal societies, which we have actually been talking about for the last 10 minutes or so. Urusha, please.
Hello everyone, my name is Tam. I'm 22 years old. I'm part of the social media team at Global Young Voices. Today I'll be introducing to you my friend Urusha, who will be talking about the role of women in the patriarchal society in Nepal.
Thank you, lovely Tam. although she's in California. But so once again, hello everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. And so far, I know we've had like a lot of qualitative discussions, a lot of questions being raised, and a lot of talk being done about important issues that for some reasons have been neglected over the years, and but should be considered and taken into account. So in that matter, and like how we've been talking about the issues that women face in patriarchal society, I will be speaking about the role of women with specific examples, of course, from my home country, Nepal, because it is one of the most male-dominated country and society. And when we like how we were talking about, you know, the curfew placed on women, like even till today, me having spent this many years in the United States alone, when I go back home to visit, I'm barely allowed to, like, you know, to stay over at a friend's place or even go out at night. And I have a time that I have to return back to home, and I do get it because it's out of love and the feeling of like protecting the women. And I do get the point that my parents bring across is because, you know, is that their lack of faith in the public to protect women. And I think that comes from a patriarchal society that undermines women in different aspects. So I strongly believe that patriarchy has been the prime obstruction of women's rights, freedom, advancement, and development. Patriarchy has become rooted in Nepalese society and legal system, and this has been a result of age-old Hindu customs and traditions. Just to give a note, Nepal is mostly like about like 80% or more of the people are Hindus, and much of like our Hindu customs and traditions since God knows when, like ages ago, have you know, different aspects to it that keeps undermining women's presence, not only their development or equality, but their presence. And I think most of which was also mentioned by our speaker Daniela when she talked about infanticides, which was a pretty high rate back in the days, because, you know, they would think that to raise a daughter is much more costly than raising a son. So the impacts of the patriarchal society can be seen in most of the Nepalese communities where women still struggle with land ownership, and menstruating girls or women, regardless of their age, are forced to spend nights in an animal shade or are forced into child marriages only because it is burdensome to raise women, like raise girls or daughter. It is true that Nepal now has a female president, the first very female president after years of unstable political scenario and changing government each year. However, like I mentioned earlier, their representation in the cabinet is still declining. It's not up to the par where it's required to be. And like we've had 9 governments since 2006. And, you know, of course, of which I'm not proud. But it was all in the process when I was in high school, and that's how like I learned more about like what was going on. And regardless of like the efforts that are being made on the political surface, there has to much has to be done on the societal level, because I think progress begins from the society, from like grassroots communities. Like, you know, it has to have some kind of beginning for it to be develop or evolve into a national or even like a global level. So I'm gonna give you examples about like how like, you know, the women face inequality or unfairness in their day-to-day lives in different aspects. One of the significant barriers, like I mentioned earlier, is their struggle to own land or property. It was according to a 2011 census. Women enjoy ownership over land and property in only 19.71% of households in Nepal. And even for that, the sources of their land ownership through a study conducted by International Organization of Migration was through husband's earnings or dowry, and only about like 7% of the women actually own land through their own earnings. And I think that speaks volume about where Nepalese women are at with regards to economic growth, with regards to being able to participate in the economic development of the country. And the main reason behind this is because men are traditionally thought to be the breadwinner of the house, the one to go out and about to do the day-to-day job, to get the money and bring it home, while women, like as the traditional gender roles, are supposed to be the caretaker of the house. And I think there needs to be a shift in direction about like how people and society perceive women's role, for it to be effectively like for women to effectively participate in economic growth activities, one of which would include like their ownership over land. We do have a new constitution that was released in 2015 after years of struggle and after years of having basically living without a constitution. We just had an interim constitution ever since the monarchy fell, and they only passed finally in 2015, and much of which was obviously dominated by the men in the cabinets, with very few like female representatives. And still today, even the new constitution, people are arguing, or like people, there has been a lot of contention about it because it limits women's right. In most of the areas, it does give them rights, but then like, in terms of gaining citizenship and like women's rights to like sons and daughters to be able to gain their citizenship through their mother there's still a barrier in that aspect. Moving on with that, I think, and this like aligns with the women's role, is the devaluation of women in patriarchal societies. Girls are valued less than boys, given our age-old ridiculous practices, which are still till date mandated and observed in various parts of Nepal. One of such practice is that of child marriage. As you can see, the statistics, 41% of girls and 11% of boys marry before age 18, and most of the reasons behind that, of course, is like in poverty, that the families are unable to raise the children, but also is because of a very like cruel social practice that has manifested from a male-dominated society, which has been for centuries. Another such manifestation of the old Hindu tradition and patriarchy is that of the practice of banishing girls and women to cowshed during their period of menstruation. And the reason why they are banished to shed is because they think that menstruation is impure, that it brings bad luck to the family, that it brings, that if there is a menstruating like women and she spends a night at the house, that the gods are going to get angry, and that the wrath will befall under the house, and that's the kind of mentality that people have had for years. And there have been organizations, local grassroots or communities that try to educate people, but it's still not active. In fact, a very recent news surfaced about a death of a 26-year-old Nepalese woman as she was spending the fourth night in the shed. And I should tell you, like, these sheds are like really tiny. I do not have it. Oh no, that's the picture. For me, like, as a woman who grew up in a city under the influence of well-educated parents, I was fortunate enough to not experience these practices to such extreme. However, I'm certainly baffled and enraged to learn that several thousand of girls and women my age and even younger are subjected to this treatment even in today's world. Now you may ask, like, why should we or like youth care about this? But it is because if we don't voice our opinion against the age-old tradition, these customs will continue to live on, and many younger girls and women will suffer the consequences of our inaction. Thank you.
In the interest of time, I'd just like to point out that I think the discussion on Urusha's point has just been made. One thing I would like to ask you, if you are aware of, and if not, we can pass it by. When I had my first student in one of my classes from Nepal about 11 years ago, I learned from him through a government report that that Nepal, which had one of the lowest internet usage and penetration rates in the world, was basing its 21st century economic development goals on access to the internet. Do you feel that is happening, or happening fast enough?
Right now, like if you think about it, actually we do have a very high like penetration of internet. So like information is available, but everything is very centralized. It's in the cities. Most of the like rural places and are still do not have access to proper internet or proper like source of media that could educate or like give information about such matters. And that's definitely, like, you know, people keep blaming the government, but then I like to think that the government is made of the people, and like people need to start like taking responsibility. And as youth, like, you know, we do need to stand in matters as such to make so that we can lead the people behind us to make improvements, because obviously this problem is not going to be solved overnight, right? And I feel like there's only very much that social media can do, especially if traditions as such has been rooted in the mindset of people, because it has been practiced over generations for centuries.
Thank you, Arusha. Camilla, let's move along now. I think the introduction will take place, correct?
Hello everyone, I'm Eddie Siman from Beirut, Lebanon. I'm 22 years old and I'm the editor-in-chief of Global Young Voices. Today I'll be introducing Renee. Renee will talk to you about the progress, challenges, and steps that need to be taken in order to secure economic autonomy for women in El Salvador.
Hello everybody, thanks for coming, and thanks for all the viewers that are attending this conference via Facebook Live. My name is Camila, but in Global Young Voices I am Renee, just to avoid any confusions with Cam, which is my middle name. So my topic today is on women's economic empowerment. And I'm just going to start by saying that in 2014, the governments of El Salvador, Costa Rica, and Panama signed an agreement that stated their commitment to improve women's economic autonomy by incorporating this issue in the public agenda and by developing different policies that will improve women's economic situation. Now, the fact that this was in 2014 doesn't mean that before there were no efforts being done to increase women's economic situation, but signing this agreement did meant that they were really committed to it, and also that they were adhering to the mechanisms of evaluation and accountability that are established by these countries and by the international community as well. My presentation tonight will be especially on El Salvador, and I should say that it's a multifaceted issue, and it is not my intention to exhaust the topic, but I do want to give you an idea of how El Salvador is doing in this regard. So let's define terms. Economic empowerment, according to International Center for Research on Women, defines it as when women has both the ability to succeed and advance economically, and also the power to make and act on economic decisions. Now there are two implications in this definition. Number one is that to succeed and advance economically, women need the skills and resources to compete in markets as well as fair and equal access to economic institutions. And number two is that to have the power and agency to benefit from economic activities, women need to have the ability to make and act on decisions and control resources and profits. Now, women in El Salvador do have the ability to advance and succeed economically, as well as the power to make and act on economic decisions. However, there is still work to be done in this regard. So in a span of 15 years, from 1998 to 2013, studies have shown that women's participation in the labor force experienced small growth. In 2013, men outnumber women in terms of participation in the labor force. 8 out of 10 men that are in the working age are either working or actively looking for a job, while in the case of women, it's only 5 out of 10. Now, the difference between these two rates is about 30%, and what is very interesting, I find, is that in those 15 years, that difference hasn't changed. It has stayed constant, which means it's not growing. And in fact, when there's economic growth in the country, women tend to participate more in the labor force. But it also brings the question, like, why are we reducing it? And so there was this study made, and as an effort to try to find ways to reduce this gap. If we break down that ratio, women's ratio, so that 49.3%, we see that unemployment is less in women, 4.7 versus 6.8, but the trade-off here is that underemployment is bigger. What this means is that women is present in the informal sector, basically making them less likely to take advantage of different benefits, whether it's in health, whether it's in education, or access to capital, or just having an insurance out there. And that's why the rate of women's presence in the formal sector is much lower compared to men. And also, as we mentioned before in our discussion, the gap between men and women in terms of remuneration decreases as their level of education increases when they are employed. So that already gives us light on areas where El Salvador can invest, so trying to direct women out of the informal sector and also invest in the education sector for women. In terms of the population inactive, women population inactive in the labor force, this rate is 2.6 times larger than men, so 50.7% of women are out of the labor force. And when they were asked why would they not pursue, even if they are able to work, why wouldn't they join the workforce? The majority of them said because they will take care of their homes or take care of other personal circumstances. The second reason largest reason was because they are pursuing academic studies. And then the smallest percentage was because they had health issues. So, in essence, women's participation in the labor force remains low. A higher percentage of women compared to men are entrepreneurs. In general, women have jobs of lower quality, which is also reflected in a rate of underemployment higher than that of men. And the percentage of inactive women seems to suggest that they take over unpaid work. More than 2 out of 3 women remain outside of the labor market for unpaid domestic work and personal obligations. I think some observations moving forward is to look at the reasons why women stay outside of the labor market and address these. For instance, I mentioned that the biggest reason why women will not work is because they will take care of their homes. So maybe creating financially accessible daycares and can help women pursue a career outside, while also their kids are receiving early education, which studies have shown that there's a correlation. Kids that receive early education are more likely to pursue superior studies. So it's an investment for their kids as well. Also for those women that are in the formal sector, and I think also in formal sector, maybe associations of private enterprises can foster a culture of life and work balance so that the work of the home is valued and seen with more prestige. And women can take care of their homes because they do like taking care of their homes, but at the same time developing their professional career. then I don't have these on my part, but I will say that if we want to even start talking about women empowerment, a big issue that really is El Salvador dealing with is violence. So we do have to, we have a responsibility to demand the rule of law and pursuing corruption, because many times violence is actually directed from the public sector, from administrators. So if we want more resources to invest in education for women or may help them transition to the formal sector, then we have to have financial resources, and the excuse always is that there is no money. But it looks like the participation rate is not gonna, increase, like the difference between men and women. But we're hoping at least my generation to reduce it as much as we can. So thank you very much, and I'm interested in your comments.
Camila, Renee.
It's like my father.
You mentioned 3 countries, El Salvador,
Costa Rica and Panama. Yeah.
Is there the possibility that this issue might be attacked regionally rather than nation by nation?
I think that was one of the main reasons why this agreement was signed with other 2 nations in the region, because I will say that also Guatemala needs to do something. They have also natives, they have to deal with native communities, which is not a big of a thing in the other Central American countries. But when you make a statement with 3 other countries, you probably are also pursuing the other countries in the region to also join into fixing what's women situation.
How are you personally going to get involved in this?
I think one thing that is very important is to educate women that of the resources that are out there. So when I was doing research on this presentation, there are already different initiatives from the government, from non-for-profit organizations, and some from private companies that do try to foster these, making the economic situation of women better. So, but many people won't know about it. And so if they don't know, they won't ever try to, just find some extra help from any of these places.
Isn't it remarkable that the word education just came in again? Thank you very much. And finally, folks, another old friend of mine, Kushan Costa from Sri Lanka, is going to talk about the changing role of women and their place in Sri Lankan culture.
Hello everyone, my name is Guinevere Santaguida and I'm a writer at Global Young Voices. I'm 16 years old and I'm from Canada. Today I would like to introduce my friend Kushan, who will be talking about the roles of women in traditional Sri Lanka and some of the challenges they face due to society and pressure.
As introduced, my name is Kushan Costa. In the name of conserving time, I'll try to keep my speech brief. Well, as I spoke earlier, like the situation of women in Sri Lanka is definitely better than much of our regional peers. We've had the first female president in the world back in the 1960s, Siramawa Bandaranayake, and later her daughter, Chandrika Bandaranayake, went on to be an executive president. But there is an irony with this when we consider currently in our politics, women are not represented as well as they should be. And moving on, when talking about the situation of women, we have better healthcare facilities, we have universal healthcare for everybody, and we do have notable examples of people who succeeded. For example, Otara Gunawardena, she is the CEO of a local clothing chain called Odell, and she recently, I think about a couple of years ago, came into an agreement that actually brought in, that made her a millionaire. And so we do have a lot of examples of successful women, and that has made it a norm within the country to see successful women. So we see women as doctors, as engineers, as teachers, and I think that has done a lot towards helping the status of women in the country. And as I said earlier, the literacy rate is at 92.6, and 60% of undergraduates enrolled in university are female. So the education really does play a role in bringing women to, giving them more opportunities. However, while they do participate in these roles, there is still the glass ceiling when it comes to management positions. And that's something that the world over that we're trying to solve, but it's something, that's been going on. On the other hand, female participation in the labor sector remains low. I think it's 60% less than the amount of men who are involved in the labor sector. And that's something that moving forward, Sri Lanka can develop on. On the other hand, another sector that's closely related to the image of women in the Sri Lankan imagination is the foreign domestic labor market. Every year, about 120,000 women go to, especially the Middle East, as domestic helpers. And the image of a mother who goes abroad and brings, and earns for her children and family is talked about with a lot of bittersweet reverence. Because even though they go, and most of these women are from the lower income groups, they go to help with their economic situation back home. It's all too common to hear stories of abuse from their host families, and very inhumane things, torture, abuse, and there has been a lot of movement in the international community itself to try to pressure the Sri Lankan government as well as other governments to come up with agreements to protect the rights of these women. And that is something that needs another sector that needs attention. I would like to talk about something that recently happened in Sri Lanka. It was the Muslim Marriage and Divorce Act amendment. So this was an act that allowed certain minorities to have child marriage. And as in many situations in life, it's not black and white. So there were proposed amendments that would restrict marriage to those 18 and above, but there was resistance from certain minorities itself saying, the government shouldn't intervene with our practices. And these are, cultural practices that have been going on for generations. And then there are added to this like miscommunications and the lack of education within certain groups about how their customary law should be interpreted. So just to give a view of the general situation of women, we have the entire spectrum from those women who do not have the opportunities that the economically well-off do, and also certain restrictions that some of my colleagues talked about. Just an anecdote, and this is coming from a father of a middle-class family. They were recently they are looking for a bride for his son, and he got a marriage proposal from. This still happens, marriage proposals in Sri Lanka, and the father was actually against a certain young lady because she was engaged in graphic designing. And I don't know, I've done graphic designing. I don't think a career in graphic designing will somehow lead to marital discomfort later on. But the thing is, Westernization is being viewed with skepticism, because for a long time, marriage is something you do for life. You're married, that's it. There is no going back, literally. But now, the rates of divorce have gone up, and a lot of people are saying, maybe wrongly, but the correlation exists that that the marriage rate has gone up, and at the same time, urbanization, Westernization has gone up, and these are things, the misconceptions perhaps, that need to be addressed. And this once more goes to the education that we spoke about earlier, and educating not only the upcoming generation, which I think is going on at a good rate, but also our parents about accepting certain realities as it is. So yeah, thank you. That's fine.
I'm just going to ask for any questions from here rather than from there. Kushan, I want to ask you something. There seems to be admirable progress in some regards and rather dishonorable lack of progress in others. What are you going to do about it?
I mean, I think it's definitely not a simple question. When I was researching, talking about this, I came across reports that had the title "The Changing Role of Women." I saw a report in the mid 2000s. I saw the same title in a report in 1990s, and I saw the same title in the 70s, "The Changing Role of Women." So the role of women has been changing for half a century now, but I think it's something gradual. But it's important that we don't end up in a situation where it's two extremes, where you have the liberal. I mean, if you could
careful now.
Yeah, if you could put that in a positive way, like that side, and then and other sectors where the education is in such a low condition that that questions that this side would not even think about still exist, such as child marriage. Coming from my background, that's something that's not something that I can debate about. But yet again, here we have it. We have people who consider it as a legit concern, and I mean, I'd like to say that we can just script a law against it, but as my government is finding out, it's not that simple. So,
if there's one thing I realized tonight by listening to you, it's that there continues to exist all over the world discrepancies between what should be and what shouldn't be, between what is and what isn't. But if I were to pass along a word to you, it is that there is, pardon me, no discrepancy between what can be done. There's no alternative to that. No discrepancy there. I want to say just a few words before one other person comes up. John Kennedy said that change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past or the present are certain to miss the future. Change is inevitable, but it happens only when we make it happen. When we first see and agree on the need for it, summon the resolve, marshal the resources, create activism, and then give voice. So in that sense, as I said to my friend Rohan the other day, as change is inevitable, so is Global Young Voices. Global Young Voices is inevitable. And you have made it that way. But it takes the voice. And wouldn't you agree that we have great examples of that here tonight? I think that Global Young Voices is not just a growing group of outstanding global citizens. It is a voice. A clear, singular voice. In unison. The trumpet sounding its clarion call. And hands clasped together around the globe. So I understand that I have to now turn the microphone over to Camilla for a second, and I don't know why, and she wouldn't tell me why. But before I do, let me say, and ask the audience to join me in saying congratulations to you, Global Young Voices, on what you have already done and all that you will do.
So thank you all for coming, and I would just like to invite down here Ari and Jack, who are also part of the team at Global Young Voices. Come on. So since we're closing, I would just like to give a warm welcome to the people that made this possible. And it would start by thanking Jason Scorza, who has believed in this adventure since the very beginning. So. And to Ali Amdur as well.
How come you got 3?
Because I gave it.
And also to Sarah Horn, because she coordinated everything across 3 time zones. And lastly, for Dr. Walker, that I had the honor of meeting tonight. Thank you for being such an admirable woman. So, I would just like to close this nice discussion with a quote from one of my favorite writers. Being a woman is so fascinating. It's an adventure that requires such courage, a challenge that never ends. You will have a lot of undertakings if you will be born a woman. To start with, you will have to fight to prove that if God exists, it could also be an old woman with gray hair or a beautiful young girl. Then, you will have to explain that sin was not born the day in which Eve picked the apple. That day, the virtue of disobedience was born. Lastly, you will have to fight to demonstrate that within your silky and curvy body, there is an intelligence that ought to be served. I hope that our discussion today contributed to eliminate the archaic barriers that women face in society, so that future generations of women may benefit from a fairer and more inclusive environment. Thank you.